Military presence is a term of art designating the spatial being of the U.S. military. This can include land is used by the U.S. empire to fortify itself at home and abroad, as well as the infrastructure used to transport and operationalize those bodies. What it means to reduce that entity is not immediately clear. What is clear is that a precondition for the military, and thus for its presence, is the logic of security, and that logic of security, if anything, is heteronormative. We're called T15. There's no longer for indoctrination, security, consideration, and social defense in 1957, thus gave in doesn't mean the U.S. Empire required on national judgment, which regarding federal security claims and explanations that gates are supposed to be like notices for the government into the security apparatus that shapes public space today. A different logic. Force and fantasy concerning security has become prevalent. So security systems can be personally inconsistencies and biases of human intervention and rely on advanced algorithms of data analysis. These would be able to identify normal patterns of behavior and issue alerts whenever deviations are detected. The fantasy of achieving the security apparatus is fantasy of purely statistical claims, scientifically based determination, yet judgments concerning human evaluations, morality, propriety, united race preconceptions, infiltrate security considerations, and different races enables systems to establish statistically normal patterns and to single out abnormal ones. Identified abnormalities are automatically classified as suspicious. Norm here is presumably merely a derivative of statistical calculation, yet examining identified potential threats reveals the normative biases of the system. Social deviations are imprinted into security logic, into the security logics, becoming subjected to security-oriented treatment, and this returns us to the resolution. Security logics has become entangled with heteronormativity in the ways in which we contort our presence in certain spaces, specifically in spaces already marked as queer. Nationalism and progressivism collude with Orientalism in order to justify the war and terror as a larger war on and for decency, in the process largely termed now as homo-nationalism. Ecothelon 13. In 2005, Bush spoke to the government statements one-sided with attempts to remake a new world straight over the U.S. national security strategy declared in time to be from the essential role of American military strength. The strategy will beyond articulating the desire for traditional geopolitical security to a specific type of family unit, inheritance, and lineage relations to be secured. As well, in this way, the U.S. focuses on killing the gays in Iraq, serves to police the Orientalized other Muslim sexuality, and hence in this way, the career of Iraq can turn into a sexual racial subsidy, and this sort of career freedom device burn into a annexation to legitimate the creation of sovereign spaces where the Muslims separate the non-manly from the manly to kill them. These you as coming out speeches highlight the ways in which queer subjects are being valorized in this the emerging international sexual power conflicts and racial subsidies in the form of value are reduced to questions of reproductive stabilities and allegiances. Thus, the question remains, where do queers become available for a conversation about global power? I argue that this racialized discipline of the homosexual is both problematic and a strategy of extracting more value, a realization of an ethical universality and innovation, and it's sundering from a cleansing of sexual slavery, productivity, and homo-nationalism and homonormativity are superstructural forces that categorize queerness in racialized ways. Domestically, queers who don't fit the homonormative mode are marked as antithetical to the larger goal of queer futurism, while internationally, brown bodies are marked as inherently queer in order to justify the wars conducted at their expense. Shot in F-15. Queer spirits from the confession with the gang of lesbian subjectivity, race, identity, nation, gender, class, and sexuality, desire, gay, homosexual, and queer national subject to align themselves with the U.S. imperial interests from legitimate queerness that makes them that propels the population to extinction. Happening married couples that probably the interested would be properly queer. The monster here respected is abjected into existence through torture and Abu Ghraib stigmatized as suffering from arrested development by the psychological literature of the security studies and properly queer. These queernesses go together much as a child and the queer go together. The improper queer who steps outside these social borders is antagonistic to order to queerness as a process of nationalization and racialization will increase and expand the understanding of heteronormative war. The future is terrorist and the future that is symbolized not only by the charm but also by the nation and Christianity. The terror serves as a monstrous excess of that nation and undeniably linked with Islam. Islam threatens the futurist morality of American empire, retrograde backward and frozen religiosity. Islam threatens the progress narrative of the U.S. imperial wars led to bring freedom not only to women and homosexuals but also to uncivilized, savage, and undemocratic peoples around the world. And as our queerness is used as a discursive tool through which compliance with national interests is bargained for. After all, if we're not grateful for any and every step in the right direction taken by the U.S., we deserve to be left in the dark recesses of the queer dystopia from which our journey began. It is simultaneously used as a structural marker through which our experiences can be likened to the monstrous terrorist facts that is the United States' prime directive to eliminate. This creates a system through which criticism only profits and accommodates a larger heteronormative force, but there are alternatives. While the logic of futurism structures both right and left alternatives to the status quo politics, queerness can be used as a radical tool by accepting the horrors of death and the disintegration of all social order at the hands of non-normative queer practices. We can break down heteronormativity and subvert homonormativity. Public opposition to the imperative of performance disrupt not only the production but also the underlying logic of the political. Shot on the 15. Sluggish like queer terrorism, working on inevitable effects of modern politics, committed to and modern politics committed to, and reproduction of a promise yet impossible plenitude and never rise politics also reproduces the enemies of that future. We must refuse politics itself rather than fall prey to the logic of the child element, encourage queers to embrace the stigmatized position as negativity, definite futurelessness of social life. This means adopting the belief that abortion and non-procreative sexual pleasure led to the undo of social life and the downfall of civilization instead of previously vying for a place at the table of reproductive futurism or wanting for another piece of Americans carbon monoxide high squares should see their position and also dissolution of the social order and get to work doing precisely that. We might undertake the impossible project of imagining political stance exempt from the imperative to reproduce the politics of signification, denying one's queerness, one's status as self-indulgent, narcissistic, or terrorist and becoming good, white, up, rarely mobile, reprove normative citizens. It may allow some of us to cast off that queerness, but it will do so only by shifting the figural burden of queerness to someone else's insistence on embodying even typifying the very loathsomeness of queerness makes no future a radical text for theorizing resistance. Refusal of politics is an act of political resistance. It is opposition to politics as such to the very moment of temporality in the social that dictates the contours of the political, thus also deny affirm queerness as negativity. Publicly recognizing that to be queer means to be totally antithetical to the current social order is a violent act of a disidentification that refuses narratives of progress and reform and their ability to constitute nationalist queer subjects as opposite to terrorist objects who are supposed to hate your ballot then is an important tool in naming the heteronormativity that pervades mainstream academic spaces. Endorse the act with your ballot as an act of normalizing arenas of refusal. It is a radical form of academic engagement that surfaces alternative pedagogies. Hopper 711. The desire to be taken seriously is precisely what compels people to follow the trend and the true path of knowledge production around, which I would like to map a few detours. Terms like serious and rigorous tend to be code words in academia for disciplinary correctness, a singular form of training and learning that confirms what is already known according to approved methods of knowing, but they do not allow for visionary insights or flights of fancy, though it may look like a disaster. There are many examples of rogue intellectuals or perished pressure of academic life keeps them tethered to conventional knowledge production of the intellectual world, conjured by losers, failures, dropouts, and refusings, often serve as a launching pad for alternatives precisely when the university cannot. Universities grades, exams, and knowledge of canons identify scholars with an aptitude for maintaining and conforming the dictates of the discipline. When the disciplines qualify and disqualify, illegitimate and delegitimate, reward and punish, they statistically reproduce themselves and inhibit descent in a place of all encompassing and global theories that the university encourages. Foucault exhorts his students to think about and turn to the subjugated knowledges, namely those forms of knowledge production that have been buried or masked in the functional coherences of the formal systematizations. Conversation rather than mastery indeed seems to offer one very concrete way of being in relation to the other form of being, and knowing without seeking to measure that light in modality to by the standards that are already external to it. The moment is a defeat for the teacher. It's a triumph for alternative pedagogies because it reminds us that learning is a two-way street and you cannot teach without a dialogical relation to the learner.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just get out of this little maze I've created. Okay. Why vote AF?
We think voting AF is an affirmation of queerness as negativity. What that means is that we reject the norms or the narrative that is ascribed to the queer body as being something that is necessarily good, white, overtly, all of those things as what is a good queer. We refuse to identify with that, and instead we disidentify with all of the notions of reform, progress, all of these things. It's a radical destabilization of how civil society functions because it functions by the productivity generated off of things that
cool. Thank you.
contribute value.
Yeah, what is homo-nationalism?
What is homo-nationalism?
So homo-nationalism is a specific superstructural force that operates upon two fulcrums, one of heteronormativity and one of homonormativity. So the idea is that as queer politics become assimilated and become used by mainstream superstructural forces, i.e. the government literally, to justify things like interventionism, we kind of get wrapped up in the idea that certain countries are gay-friendly and certain countries aren't gay-friendly, i.e. all the Middle Eastern countries that we want to invade probably aren't gay-friendly, and the United States lends, whereas the United States is super cool with the gays, right? Because if we are, then we are able to build social capital with those groups and then use that social capital to justify the intervention I'm talking about.
Okay, cool. So I guess then what is the process in which that public recognizing as queer then deconstructs heteronormativity? Is that disidentification stuff that you were talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's both a disidentification and identification because the point is also to draw connections between me as a white queer person to the brown queer bodies we have in Guantanamo.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right. So it's a question of identifying as queer, but acknowledging that that identity as queer is not what other people have painted it to be.
Yeah.
Sure.
Kind of? Am I on the right track?
You're on the right
Yeah.
track.
Okay.
So the argument is partially that like queer as a descriptor is not an accurate representation of people's sexualities, but rather that it's used to mark both sexuality and certain racial categorizations of people. So when we talk about things like monster terrorist bags, we're talking about the way in which the United States scripts people that we house in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib and justify torturing them because they're seen as queer.
Okay, so then as a result of the act, do these places like close? Like, are you able to close places like Guantanamo? Are you able to reduce military presence in other places?
That line of questioning.
Okay,
We would say that before we can answer those questions, we have to challenge the futurist drive for politics that allows us to come to grips with what that question would even mean.
okay, so I guess like what is the larger goal of queer futurism?
So the goal, as per the one you see in debate, is just to normalize an arena of refusal in which we can positively say comfortably that the state is bad.
Okay, and then once that happens, then you
Yeah,
can go
collective
on.
form, presumably.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Summing up the one I see now, it's 3 off my page.